I was standing beside my son's casket when my 8-year-old granddaughter tugged on my sleeve, her small body trembling with a distress that transcended childish fear. Her voice was a fragile whisper that barely cut through the funereal silence. "Grandma Evelyn, check your purse right now." I looked down at Iris's pale face, the green of her eyes, the exact shade of my Thomas's, swimming with unshed tears. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. She didn't look at me. Her gaze flickered toward the front row where my daughter-in-law, Natasha, sat studying expensive calculated grief in her designer black dress. "Your wallet, Grandma. She took something when you were crying." I saw her. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The low, mournful drone of the organ music faded into an irrelevant hum. The heavy, sweet scent of the white lilies blanketing Thomas's simple pine casket became instantly suffocating. My hands, already aching with a strain of suppressed sorrow, shook violently as I reached for my black leather purse sitting on the chair beside me. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story from. I want to know how far it has reached. I opened my purse and unzipped the wallet compartment with trembling fingers. At first, everything appeared normal. My reading glasses, the sodden tissues I'd been using all morning to discreetly wipe my tears, my phone, all accounted for. But when I flipped open the cash section, my breath stopped, hitching painfully in my chest. The crisp $500 I'd withdrawn just yesterday for the catering deposit and the funeral director's final fees was gone, stripped clean. The emergency credit card I kept hidden in a small, seldom-used back pocket gone as well. And, worst of all, the only photograph I had left of Thomas as a baby, a precious, yellowed image I'd carried with me for 42 years, the corners worn soft from the constant pressure of my thumb, had been viciously torn in half and stuffed carelessly back into the coin section like discarded trash. I stared at Iris, her small body vibrating with tension. She was clutching the purple teddy bear her father had given her last Christmas, the last tangible symbol of his love before the cancer took him 3 weeks ago. "Who did this?" I whispered, the words rasping in my throat, though I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, who the culprit was. Iris didn't speak the name. She simply turned her head slightly, indicating Natasha, who sat perfectly posed, dabbing at dry eyes with a pristine silk handkerchief, executing her performance as the devastated widow for the dozens of onlookers. I am 63 years old, and I thought I had weathered every storm life could muster. I buried my husband 15 years ago, and for the last 8 months, I had watched my only son waste away in a sterile hospital bed while a cruel, relentless pancreatic cancer destroyed him. But this malicious, petty violation, committed at the very peak of my grief and vulnerability at my son's memorial, cut deeper than all the preceding pain. It was a calculated, final act of dominance and insult. I slowly closed my purse and pulled Iris into a tight embrace, burying my face in her hair. "It's going to be okay, baby," I murmured, a promise I desperately needed to believe myself. Around us, people continued to gather and murmur distant cousins, Thomas's colleagues from the engineering firm, neighbours we hadn't seen in years. Everyone was dressed in respectful black, speaking in hushed, sorrowful tones that reflected a genuine loss for a truly good man. And there, at the epicenter of the gathering, was Natasha, accepting their condolences with a practiced sadness that never once reached the cold calculation of her eyes. It was a sickening, polished display of greed masking itself as grief. I vividly recall the day Thomas first brought her home 5 years ago. He had called me that morning, his voice alight with a boyish excitement I hadn't heard since he graduated college. "Mom, I want you to meet someone special. Her name is Natasha. I think she might be the missing piece of my life. My heart, long quiescent since my husband passed, fluttered with an old, hopeful warmth. I spent the afternoon preparing my famous pot roast, setting the table with my grandmother's good china, hoping for a return to the simple, warm family dinners we used to share. When they arrived, Natasha stepped across my threshold, not like a guest, but like an actress stepping onto a brightly lit stage. She was undeniably beautiful, with long, dark hair that fell in perfect controlled waves, and a smile that seemed to show a little too much teeth. "Mrs. Evelyn, Thomas has told me so much about your wonderful cooking," she said, handing me an absurdly expensive bottle of wine that felt wrong and excessive in my humble kitchen. During dinner, I watched her with a mother's careful scrutiny. She complimented everything too intensely, not with genuine warmth, but with a clinical, analytical approval. She touched Thomas's arm possessively, an oddly territorial gesture. Her eyes constantly scanned my modest living room, taking an instantaneous inventory of its age and its lack of high value. "Thomas, this house is so quaint," she stated, which I immediately understood to mean small, old, and utterly beneath her standards. But Thomas was utterly blind to the subtle toxic currents of her personality, intoxicated by her beauty and her unwavering, albeit possessive, attention. Later, when Thomas went to the kitchen to fetch dessert, Natasha leaned toward me. Her voice dropped, instantly losing its honeyed sweetness. "I hope you know how lucky Thomas is to have found me. So many men his age are still living with their mothers, dependent on their family's assistance." The words were calculated, delivered with the precision of a scalpel, drawing clear battle lines and signalling that I was viewed as an inconvenient obstacle in her grand future plans. Over the next year, I watched in helpless anguish as Natasha systematically isolated Thomas from every person who truly loved him. First, his college friends. "They're holding you back, baby. You need to focus on networking, not old beer buddies." Then, our weekly Sunday dinners. "Your mother is far too needy, Thomas. We have our own life now. A life that doesn't revolve around her pot roast and her endless stories." She convinced him to sell his comfortable apartment and buy a massive, expensive house across town, just far enough that visiting required significant planning and effort, which she expertly discouraged. She began monitoring his phone calls and emails. When I called, she almost always answered first. "Thomas is tied up, Evelyn. I'll have him call you back when he's free." He rarely did. Their wedding was a lavish spectacle, 300 guests, most of them strangers to me, ice sculptures, a 7-tier cake, and a live band that cost an obscene amount. I sat in the front row, in a modest dress I'd bought on sale, feeling utterly insignificant, watching my son pledge his life to a woman I knew, deep down, would eventually consume and destroy him. After they married, Thomas began to look constantly exhausted. The genuine, easy light in his eyes slowly dimmed. When I did see him, usually when Natasha was out shopping or at the spa, he'd mechanically offer excuses for her behavior. "She's just very particular, Mom. She has high standards. She wants our life to be perfect, and I respect that ambition." He was wearing down, becoming a pale shadow of the vibrant, ambitious man I had raised. Then Iris was born, and for a fleeting time, I held on to hope. Perhaps motherhood would finally soften Natasha, replacing her deep-seated greed with unconditional love. I will never forget holding Iris in the hospital, so impossibly tiny, with a shock of dark hair and those unmistakable green eyes, a pure, innocent reflection of Thomas. But Natasha treated motherhood like another opportunity for social media performance. Professional photo shoots were scheduled monthly. Iris was dressed in designer baby clothes that often still had the tags attached, and the nursery looked magazine perfect but was utterly lifeless. Natasha hired a full-time live-in nanny within weeks, retreating quickly back to her spa days and shopping excursions, all funded by Thomas's aggressively increasing salary and mounting debt. I wasn't allowed to babysit. No offense, Evelyn, but you're not up to date with modern parenting techniques. You'd probably let her eat things off the floor. My visits with Iris were supervised, Natasha acting as a rigid security guard, ensuring I didn't contaminate her perfect curated life. Then came the shattering diagnosis. Thomas called me, his voice barely a rasp, breaking into pieces I couldn't put back together. "Mom, it's cancer. Stage 4. Pancreatic." The world stopped. I sank to my kitchen floor, unable to breathe, the noise of the outside world suddenly muffled and distant. My baby, my only child, was dying. The doctors gave him 6 months, maybe a year, even with aggressive chemotherapy and radiation. Natasha's reaction, when I told her, wasn't grief or shock. It was immediate, cold, and devastatingly calculated. Within days, she had Thomas working with their attorney, writing a new will, meticulously organizing their complex financial affairs, and documenting every single asset. She insisted on being the sole beneficiary, relentlessly citing her role as his wife, his caregiver, and the mother of his child. The entire estate was to be hers. The $2 million life insurance policy, the $800,000 house, the retirement accounts, all of it. It's standard, Thomas. I'm your wife. I need protection for my future and Iris's, especially now. Thomas too sick, too exhausted, and too overwhelmed by the proximity of death trusted her completely, signing away his entire life's work to the person who, I realized, was already planning her future without him. I spent every single day at the hospital during those 8 agonizing months. I arrived early, often before the nurses started their rounds, and stayed until the orderlies physically forced me out. I was there for him in ways Natasha never was, reading to him, holding his hand, spoon-feeding him ice chips, telling stories from his childhood, the time he caught fireflies in a jar, the disastrous tree house he built with his father, his college struggles. Iris would visit, climbing carefully onto his narrow, sterile hospital bed, her small body radiating the warmth and life he was losing. "Daddy, when are you coming home?" Thomas would weakly stroke her hair, tears of love and regret in his eyes. "Soon, sweetheart, very soon." Natasha rarely visited, sometimes only once a week for 20 minutes. Her excuses were always perfectly crafted and infuriatingly plausible. Too busy managing the house, handling the mountains of insurance paperwork, dealing with the immense stress of his illness. But I knew the truth. She wasn't managing. She was simply planning the final steps to collect the massive payout she had waited for. One devastating afternoon, about a month before he passed, Thomas was having a deceptively good day. Natasha actually showed up, impeccably dressed for a lunch date, looking annoyed at the interruption. Thomas took her hand, his voice raspy and weak. "Promise me, Natasha, you take care of Iris. Promise you'll let my mother be part of her life. She needs her grandma." Natasha smiled perfectly, leaned in to kiss his damp forehead. "Of course, baby. Whatever you want. Your wishes are my command." But when she turned away from him, when Thomas couldn't see, I caught her expression, a flash of cold annoyance, a flicker of pure, contemptuous calculation. I knew she was lying. I knew the moment he was gone, she would cut me out completely, permanently, and without mercy. 3 weeks ago, on a desolate Tuesday morning, Thomas took his last rattling breath. I was holding his hand, feeling the final spark of life leave his fingers. Iris was asleep in the chair beside me, covered in a blanket. Natasha wasn't there. She'd gone home hours earlier, needing her beauty rest. When the machines flatlined, when the nurses came in with practiced sympathy, something inside me finally broke. I called Natasha. She answered groggily, sounding irritated at being woken. "He's gone," I said, the words heavy and hollow. There was a pause. "I'll be there in an hour. Don't let them do anything until I get there." Not "I'm sorry," not "oh God." Just cold, self-serving logistics. The funeral planning was a nightmare, entirely orchestrated by Natasha. She took over everything, pushing me aside with cruel, efficient finality. I'm his wife, Evelyn. I decide what's appropriate. She chose the cheapest, decent casket, ordered the sterile white lilies because they photographed well for her planned social media posts, and wrote an obituary that barely mentioned my existence. When I suggested Thomas be buried next to his father in the family plot, as he had always wished, she shut me down instantly. "Cremation is more practical, Evelyn, and cheaper." The service was scheduled quickly. No point dragging out the sadness, she explained. And here we were. The funeral home packed with people who genuinely loved Thomas, and the woman who had married him only for profit had just stolen from me while I wept over his body. It was the ultimate brazen disrespect. I looked down at Iris, holding her tightly. "Sweetheart, tell me exactly what happened. When did you see her?" Iris's voice was barely a whisper. "When everyone was looking at Daddy in the casket, you were crying and Aunt Veronica was hugging you. Mommy opened your purse on the chair. I saw her take the money from your wallet. Then she tore that baby picture. She saw me watching. 'Grandma!' She smiled. She smiled like it was funny. My hands clenched in two fists, the image of that malicious smile an inferno in my mind. The photograph I'd carried for 42 years. She had destroyed it deliberately, a final vicious message. I have won. You have nothing left. The funeral director approached, looking stressed and apologetic. "Mrs. Evelyn, we're ready to begin the service." I nodded, my mind racing, a cold, unshakable resolve settling deep in my gut, replacing the raw, crippling grief with pure, focused fury. People took their seats. The organ music started again. Natasha sat in the front row, openly checking her phone. But I was not letting this go. I leaned down to Iris. "Go sit with Aunt Veronica, baby. Grandma needs to do something important, something your father would want. Stay strong." I walked to the front, past startled faces, past Natasha, who looked up, annoyed at the movement, and stood directly before my son's simple casket. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through the organ music, sharp and clear, carrying to every corner of the silent room. "Before we begin, there is something that needs to be addressed immediately." The entire room went silent. Natasha hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "Evelyn, what are you doing? Sit down, you're making a scene." I ignored her completely. I pulled out my wallet, holding it up for the dozens of faces to see. Someone stole from me today, here at my son's funeral, while I was openly grieving over his body. Someone went through my purse, took my money, and, worst of all, deliberately destroyed the only baby picture I had of Thomas. Gasps erupted throughout the room. Whispers started, buzzing like angry flies. Natasha stood abruptly, her face a mask of furious shock and raw anger, her composure beginning to fracture. "How dare you make false accusations? You're clearly unstable with grief. This is slander." I pulled out the torn photograph, holding up both pieces for people to see the jagged tear across Thomas's tiny smiling face. My granddaughter witnessed the act. She saw who did it. She's 8 years old, she just lost her father, and she has been carrying this terrible secret because she is afraid of the person who committed this act of petty theft and vandalism. Natasha's sister, Simone, who looked genuinely confused, stood up. "Nat, what is she talking about? What did you do?" Veronica, my dear, long-time friend, stood as well. "Let her speak, Natasha." I looked directly at Natasha, watched the mask crumble. saw a flicker of pure animal panic in her eyes. Tell them, Natasha. Tell them what you did. Or should Iris come up here and tell everyone what she saw her stepmother do, how she smiled while doing it? The silence was deafening. All eyes were on Natasha, her mouth opening and closing without sound, the lies caught in her throat. Then she let out a forced, brittle, hysterical laugh. "This is insane! You're having a complete breakdown, Evelyn. I understand you've lost your son and you're not thinking clearly. But making up malicious stories and involving poor Iris in your delusions, that's just cruel." Her voice was steady, but I could see her hands shaking violently. I turned back to the crowd. "Veronica, you were with me yesterday when I opened my wallet at the restaurant. I took out $500 in cash for today's deposit. How much did I have?" Veronica stepped forward, her voice strong with conviction. $500, Evelyn, all $100 bills. I remember because you worried about carrying that much cash. I held my wallet open to the crowd. Empty, completely empty. The emergency credit card is also gone. Simone stared at her sister, her face now a mix of dawning horror and disbelief. "Nat, just show them your purse. Prove her wrong if this is nonsense. Just show it." Natasha clutched her expensive designer bag closer to her body. "I don't have to prove anything to this unstable old woman. This is harassment. At my husband's funeral, you are harassing me." Thomas's best friend, Marcus, who had been sobbing quietly moments ago, spoke up, his voice low and dangerous. "Just show us the damn purse, Natasha. If you have nothing to hide, then show us now." I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the police. Let them search her bag. Let them check the security cameras on the property. Let's see what they find." Natasha's face went ghastly white. "You wouldn't dare! I'll sue you for defamation and emotional distress." "Watch me," I said, and dialed 911. That's when she broke. "Fine! You want to show? You want the truth?" Natasha screamed, her composure finally shattering into 1,000 pieces. She violently threw her expensive purse down onto the thick burgundy carpet. It burst open, spilling its contents. Money scattered across the floor, my $500 bills among her compact and lipstick. And there, next to her phone, was my emergency credit card, my name clearly visible on the embossed lettering. The room erupted. Shouts, curses. Simone backed away from her sister in sheer visible horror. Marcus took a step forward, looking murderous, restrained only by Veronica. But Natasha was laughing, a cold, terrifying, soundless laugh that held no hint of humor. "You want the truth? Fine. Here's the truth. Your precious Thomas was weak, boring, a meal ticket, and nothing more, and he finally paid up." The silence that fell after this statement was profound, deeper and darker than the silence of grief. "I never loved him," she continued, her words like sharp shards of glass cutting through the air. "Not for one single second. But he had a good job, a house, prospects. When he got sick, when I realized he was actually dying, I made sure every single asset was legally put into my name. The life insurance, $2 million. The house, $800,000. Retirement accounts? Another million. All mine. Legally mine. She smirked, a look of pure, triumphant malice. You think stealing a few $100 matters? That was a souvenir. I'm walking away with nearly $4 million. And there's nothing any of you, especially this pathetic family, can do about it. And you, she shrieked, pointing a contemptuous finger directly at me. You pathetic old woman, you were always in the way. Thomas pitied you. He kept you around out of obligation, not love. Every Sunday dinner, every needy phone call, he complained to me constantly about how much of a burden you were. Veronica gripped my arm fiercely, her own eyes blazing with fury. Don't listen to her, Evelyn. She's poison. She's pure, unadulterated evil, and she's lying to hurt you. The police arrived shortly after, responding to multiple emergency calls. They collected my money, the stolen credit card, and began taking formal statements from me, Iris, and Veronica. An officer approached Natasha, whose initial hysteria had subsided, replaced by a cold, calculating defiance. Ma'am, we need you to come with us to the precinct. She tried to fight them, yelling about suing me, but the officers, faced with multiple eyewitness accounts of theft and the physical evidence on the carpet, led her out, her expensive black dress framed by the cold steel of handcuffs. Thomas's casket sat there, closed. The funeral director, shaken, asked if I would like to postpone the service. I shook my head, suddenly exhausted, but utterly resolute. No, we are here to say goodbye to Thomas. That is what we are going to do. The evil has been removed. We resumed the service, sharing memories of Thomas's true character, his quiet kindness, his easy humour, his brilliant mind, and his boundless, unshakable love for Iris. When my turn came, I walked to the podium on shaky legs, clutching the 2 torn pieces of his baby picture. I told them about the boy who caught fireflies, the man who wanted to help people, the father who loved his daughter. My son was a good man, I said, my voice cracking but firm. He made one mistake. He trusted the wrong person. But that does not define him. His kindness defines him. His love defines him. And that love remains, living in Iris and in all of us who knew him. When the service ended, I finally gave way to the overwhelming emotion. Veronica held me while I wept, and Iris climbed into my lap, her small arms wrapped around my neck. We cried together, 3 people, bound by love, for a man taken too soon and utterly betrayed by the woman who'd promised to cherish him. That night, after I tucked Iris into bed at my house, Detective Morrison called. The sound of the phone was jarring. Mrs. Evelyn, this is Detective Morrison. I'm handling your case regarding Natasha Williams. Yes, Detective? I asked, adrenaline surging back. She's been formally charged with theft, and we've executed a search warrant at the marital home. We found extensive digital and paper documentation showing she'd been systematically stealing from your son for years, siphoning nearly $300,000 from their joint accounts, opening and maxing out credit cards in his name without his knowledge long before the diagnosis. She was fleecing him all along, Mrs. Evelyn. This wasn't just about the insurance. She got sloppy at the end, and the evidence is overwhelming. I sank onto the edge of my bed, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of her depravity. 300,000? He never knew? We believe he didn't. She was meticulously careful. With him gone, she thought the money would be hers and the evidence gone. But we found the trail. Given the amounts and the financial exploitation of a vulnerable, terminally ill person, she's looking at serious prison time. We've managed to secure an emergency freeze on all the major assets. She claimed the house, the insurance, the retirement funds. They are all being held pending a final ruling. There is a very strong likelihood that the bulk of those assets will be recovered and awarded to Iris and you as Thomas's non-fraudulent heirs. I looked at Iris sleeping peacefully down the hall. Thank you, Detective. Thank you for seeking justice for my son. I whispered a silent promise to Thomas in the dark. I'll take care of her. I'll make sure Iris knows who you really were. The subsequent weeks were a grueling blur of legal filings, police follow-ups, and painful disclosures. Natasha was denied bail due to being deemed a major flight risk, compounded by the overwhelming evidence of financial crime. The investigation revealed even more horrifying details. She had been having a long-term affair for 2 years with Thomas's business partner, a man named Peter. They had conspired to collect the insurance money and disappear. Investigators recovered text messages where she had actually celebrated Thomas's terminal diagnosis, texting her lover, "Finally, the payday is coming, babe." Just a few more months of this depressing drama. Reading those messages destroyed the last vestige of my belief that she was merely greedy. She was monstrous. 3 months after the funeral, I was awarded emergency temporary custody of Iris. The court deemed Natasha utterly unfit, a danger to the child's well-being. Iris was now officially and permanently safe under my care. That first night, as I tucked her in, she asked me softly, "Grandma Evelyn, is Mummy ever coming back to live with us? Is she going to hurt us?" "I don't know, sweetheart," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But what I know is you are safe here, and you are loved. Always. Nothing can touch you here." She then told me that Daddy had said I was the strongest person he knew, and in that moment I felt a strength I didn't know I possessed. 6 months later, the final court date arrived. Natasha Williams was sentenced to 12 years in state prison for multiple counts of fraud, grand theft, and the financial exploitation of a vulnerable person. Peter, her lover, was also sentenced on conspiracy charges. Due to the overwhelming evidence of fraud, the main life insurance policy was voided, but Thomas's extensive retirement accounts, his share of the engineering firm, and the equity from the house were legally awarded to Iris with me as her designated guardian. This money wouldn't buy a yacht, but it would ensure her future college, security, stability, a future Natasha had tried to steal from her. As I walked out of the courthouse, Veronica beside me and Iris holding my hand, her grip small and firm, I felt a massive tectonic weight lift from my shoulders. The anger and grief were still there, but the burden of the fight was over. We stopped by the cemetery on the way home. I had placed Thomas's urn next to his father, just as he had always wanted a final quiet homecoming. Iris placed fresh, purple tulips on his grave. "Hi, Daddy," she said softly, touching the smooth stone. "Grandma says you're always watching over me. I hope that's true. I miss you so much." That night, I wrote everything down in my journal for Iris, so that someday she would know the complete, painful truth. I wrote, "Life will teach you that not everyone who smiles at you loves you. Not everyone who says vows means them, but it will also teach you that real love, the kind that matters, shows up. It fights, it protects, it endures. Your father had that love for you. I have that love for you. And someday you will have it to give to someone else. Remember that strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up. It's about standing at a funeral and refusing to let evil win. It's about being 8 years old and brave enough to speak truth when everyone else is silent. You saved me that day, Iris. You saved us both. And I promise, I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you know how extraordinary and brave you truly are." Now, sitting here a year later, watching Iris play in the backyard, chasing fireflies just like her father used to, her laughter echoing his joy, I understand a profound truth. Betrayal cuts deep, deeper than any physical wound, but it also reveals the true character of people. Natasha wore her mask well for years, but in the end, the mask shattered, and underneath was nothing but cold greed. But here is the critical thing she never understood. You can steal money. You can manipulate and lie and scheme. But you can't steal love. You can't fake the bond between a grandmother and her grandchild. You can't counterfeit the memories of a good man who loved deeply and truly. Those things are real in a way that money, insurance policies, and legal documents will never be. So if you're watching this and you've been betrayed, if someone you trusted has shown their true, ugly colors, I want you to know something. The pain is real. The grief is valid, but you are stronger than you think. Stand up. Speak your truth. Fight for what's right, even if it's at a funeral. And most importantly, hold on to the people who genuinely love you, because they are the ones who will stand beside you when everything else falls apart. Thomas used to say, "Family isn't just about blood, it's about who shows up. We show up, we endure, we survive, and eventually we heal. Not completely, some wounds never fully close, but enough to wake up each morning and keep going. Enough to find moments of deep, lasting joy in fireflies and purple tulips and Sunday dinners where we tell stories about the good man we lost. Enough to build a new, stronger life from the ashes of the old one." That is the profound, terrible lesson I learned standing at my son's funeral, holding a torn photograph and a stolen wallet. That justice matters. Truth matters. And love, real, true love, always, always wins in the end. I hope wherever you are right now, whatever difficult thing you're facing, you remember that. You are not alone. You are stronger than your worst day, and your story isn't over yet. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted? Someone who wore a mask so well you never saw the truth until it was too late? Drop a comment and tell me your story, because sometimes just knowing others have survived what we are going through makes all the difference. And if you found strength or solace in my story, please share it. Subscribe so more people can hear these truths, because spreading awareness helps others recognize the signs before it's too late. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And remember, keep showing up, keep fighting, keep loving the people who deserve it. That's how we honor the ones we've lost. That's how we protect the ones we truly love. God bless you all.